Okay, welcome to Chapter 20. We're going to be starting a short section of chapters. Just 4 chapters make up this little section in the text. Excuse me, I sip my coffee there. So these are kind of compact. They'll begin to really address some of the changes that the UCC imposes now that it's really become more, I want to say replacement, but really an overarching set of ideas that modify the common law traditional rules of contract. So having said that, let's go ahead and jump in. Here's the thing. There are, of course, now 50 states, but if you went back even 100 years or 150 years, you've got a massive continent from sea to sea, from Atlantic to Pacific Ocean. You've got millions of people, and you've got 50 different governments, 48 I suppose, if we just want to not include Alaska and Hawaii at the moment. We've got 48 different governments, all of which are creating different rules for how they're going to handle business law. And obviously, as the country grew closer together, in part because of technology, things like at first the railroad in the 1800s and the automobile in the early 1900s and the airplane by the middle to late 20th century, it became obvious that the United States would do better economically if it had a consistent set of laws. So early in American history, there was massive variations between states, and I mean very significant. If we went back to the Revolutionary War, the actual things like how much an ounce was, how much a pound was, how much things weighed, how long things were. These were all things that had to be settled because there were, believe it or not, Virginia pounds and Massachusetts pounds. And the Constitution settled some of those by creating a certain national standards that developed. But it also became evident that we would benefit from creating national standards for business law, and particularly for contract. Now, there were some early attempts at this in 1896, and most of these are, by the way, sponsored, created, pushed by lawyers' associations, American bar associations, different commissions. But we have in 1896 the Uniform Negotiable Instruments Act, or law. By 1906, we have the Uniform Sales Act. Now, both of these were developed by the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform Sale Laws. By the middle part of the 20th century, it was really becoming obvious that the United States, in part because we were competing with other great industrial powers that were very consistent and unified, needed a unified body of commercial law. So by the 1940s, in the United States, the American Bar Association and different organizations helped to develop the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, this is a comprehensive body of law. I can't tell you how vast and how detailed this is. If you ever go to law school, you will take UCC 1 and UCC 2. So 2 semesters or a full year in what is essentially a graduate course, a law course, is devoted to just studying the UCC. It also has a massive body of case law behind it. So not only do you have the statutes, I mean, we could talk about UCC 2-209, UCC 3-306. We could talk about those numbers, and we'll explain what some of those mean in a bit. But we've had more than, I guess now we're getting close to 80 years of cases that help us interpret what those statutes mean. It is so vast that it would be fair to say that most business transactions in some way touch, if not are completely governed by, the Uniform Commercial Code. Okay, so the important sections for us, what we'll pay attention to, and some of these aren't as important as others. Some of them indeed have been, even on this list, have been repealed. Some of them are vitally important. But basically, we take the UCC, and it was broken up into a number of articles. Now, these are the important articles or sections of the UCC that will at least mention. Like I said, some of them don't really impact us that much. Others do. Some have been kind of repealed. But the biggie, the absolute critical one, is Article 2. Article 2 of the UCC covers the sale of goods. Now notice that's goods, not labor. Many of the examples, many things I talked about previously, I would say someone offered to paint your house. Well, you know, you could view that either as a contract for labor or a contract for the sale of goods. Are you buying the paint, or are you buying the work of the painters, or are you buying both? But UCC Article 2 covers the sale of goods. If I go and buy a car, if I go and buy a load of coal, if I go and buy bushels of wheat, that is the sale of goods. Negotiable instruments, the shorthand talk of negotiable instruments would be basically checks or credit. Article 3 covers bank deposits and collections. Now, I think mentioning here, it would be fair to say that don't forget that, yes, you have Article 3 that governs bank deposits, but other national legislation will impact this. Recently, Congress created a Consumer Protection Agency. The first head of that, if you recall, was Elizabeth Warren. And obviously, because it was protecting consumers' it could have an impact on negotiable instruments, on banking deposits, on secure transactions. Same could be true of the FTC, just any one of a plethora. But that Article 4 covering bank deposits and collections is an example of something that we have some basic rules for, which sometimes are modified outside of this. Secured transactions, which we'll talk a good deal about later in the course. Storage and shipment of goods, kind of self-explanatory. Letters of credit, not something we'll spend much time on, but basically another methodology of credit. Bulk transfers, most of that's actually been repealed. You could think of that kind of as a going out of business sale. And then investment securities, Article 8. So what this does, the big advantage the UCC has, is it creates a single integrated framework for commercial transactions. Not only is it going to cover the sale of goods, it will cover the credit behind it. It will cover the negotiable instrument. It'll cover corrections. It'll cover shipments. It covers all these things. And it lets us know at each stage, here are the standard rules. Now, of course, we're talking here primarily about Article 2, a contract for the sale of goods. A strict labor contract where I hire someone to just perform labor for me, and he's not producing anything or bringing anything. So forget the painting example for a second. I hire you to sing at my concert, okay? So I'm a concert promoter, I own a arena, and I hire you. That would not fall under the UCC Article 2 because you are not selling goods, you are selling labor. And labor is treated vastly different between the states. Now, you could argue that we need a uniform labor code in the United States. And there are bits and pieces of that. We have the National Labor Relations Act and a few other things, but we do not have a consistent set of rules for labor. Okay. The other thing that was painfully obvious after the adoption of the UCC was that times change. You know, the times they are changing. One of the things that happened after its adoption in the 1940s was that leases, which previously had been relatively rare, became common. If you think about the sale of automobiles and you went back 50 years, or 60 years, or 70 years, the 1950s, there were very few sales of cars that were leasing the cars out. Now, fast forward today, and I think you'd be hard-pressed if you watched over-the-air TV and you saw a commercial for Mercedes or Chrysler or GM or Ford or BMW where they wouldn't say lease. So leases were not covered under 2, so we created 2A, which covers leases. Again, it was something we needed to do. Articles 3 and Articles 4, which were negotiable instrument and banking, were heavily revised in the 1990s. Interestingly enough, there was no major revision after the banking scandal, the mortgage scandal of 2008. Bulk transfer, as I said, which is kind of the going out of business, that was actually repealed pretty much in total by North Carolina in the year 2000. And Article 7, which has to do with, which was modified to deal with things like electronic contracts, because, of course, we're in a brave new world now. So we're going to focus primarily on Article 2, and that is the sale of goods. And it will govern any contract for the sale of those goods. And remember, contracts can be oral, they can be written. The general rule is the UCC will retain the common law rules, many of which you just learned. But sometimes there is a conflict between what the UCC says the rule should be and what the common law or traditional rules of contract are stated to be. If there is a conflict, unless the states are given an option or the states don't adopt that section of the UCC controls and modifies or sometimes abolishes the common law rule. So the first thing we need to do is think about the sections. Now, I want to give you a little bit of background on the way it's numbered. When I give you a number like UCC 2-106, as it's shown in this slide, 2 is referring to Article 2, and we know now that Article 2 concerns the sale of goods. So UCC 2, you know it's the sale of goods. Now you're going to see a 3-digit number after it, and sometimes you'll see a parentheses and another after that. But if you see a 100, so anything like UCC 2-101, 102, 105, 106, 106, generally, anything in the 100s is a definitional section. It defines terms for this, and that's true in each one. So if you went to Article 3 or Article 4 and it was 4-104 or 5-101, those would probably be definitions that would be useful in that article. So Article 2, Section 106, defines for us what a sale is. And they define a sale simply as when you pass title from a buyer to a seller for consideration. And boy, doesn't that sound like a contract to us, right? You got a buyer, you got a seller, you got consideration, you got a passage of title. So, second question, what's a good? Well, a good is something that is tangible. It has a physical existence. A cup of coffee like I'm just drinking now, or a computer, or an ounce of gold. Those are all physical, tangible goods. Sometimes you hear the term intangible in law. Intangible is something that is the opposite of a physical existence defining value. It's the intellectual idea or patent or what it represents. So a patent is intangible property. A share of stock, I mean, the actual physical share of stock is a piece of paper worth, a piece of paper is worth 1/100th of a penny maybe. But if it's stamped and it's a valid, 100,000 shares of Microsoft, it's worth more than 1/100th of a penny. You can have issues about real estate. Now, there is no uniform body of real estate law in the United States either, so both labor and real estate are exempted. But sometimes we commingle goods and land. So the UCC talks to us about what happens when we have goods that are associated with land. Well, UCC 2-107, giving us some definitions here, says basically if there has been severance or separation, if you took the goods out of the land, removed them. So a tree growing on a piece of property, that's going to be governed by UCC law. It's going to be governed by the state laws of real estate. If the tree's cut down and you sell the tree to the lumber mill, that is a sale of a good. Now, sometimes, as I said, you have goods and services being mixed. So remember I said it's a pure labor contract if you hire someone who is going to sing at your arena. But let's take a mixed use one. Let's suppose that you want to put some carpet into your house. So you go to Carpet Direct, 1-800, whatever that annoying commercial is, Carpet Direct, you go there, and you buy carpet and you buy the installation with it. And they give you a price that has both of those. So they charge you, say, $1,000 for the carpet and the installation together. So here's the question. Is this a contract for the sale of goods, or is it a contract for the labor to install it? Well, fortunately, the UCC gives us a rule. It says, it's called the predominant factor test. What's the primary purpose for the contract? Are you looking for the labor because the labor is somehow special? Or are you looking really for the goods and the labor is incidental, has to do with installation? Okay, so in our carpet example, it's pretty clear that you don't want someone to just come to your house and crawl around on the floor and bang a hammer and put nails in your hardwood. That doesn't make much sense. You really are buying the carpet, and then the installation is just something that's necessary with it. So under the predominant factor test, purchasing a carpet like that would be a contract for the sale of goods. Now, something else the UCC does that is very important is it begins to use the term merchant, and it's going to be defined in UCC 2-104. Again, let me emphasize that the 100s are definitions. You do not, I will emphasize that again, do not need to know those numbers for the test. I give them to you because if you want to run a search in North Carolina General Statutes and you typed in 2-104 NCGS, you'd be able to bring up where North Carolina adopted or maybe modified or changed any of the rules we talk about. Okay, so 2-104 gives us a definition of merchant, and this is important because merchants can have different rules than you and I. If you're just Joe Schmo, you're pretty much got some standard rules, and we're going to talk about them. But if you're a merchant, you're different. So what's a merchant? Well, the UCC gives you 3 ways you can become a merchant. 1, you can deal in goods of a kind. So here's a simple example. I operate a coin store. I sell coins to people. For the buying and selling of coins, I'm a merchant. If someone comes in and they want to sell me a water heater for my store, I'm not a merchant for a water heater. I'm a merchant, I'm a coin dealer. If someone comes in and wants to sell me a diamond ring and I buy 1 diamond ring, I'm not a merchant for diamond rings. The other way you can become a merchant is if you hold yourself out as an expert. If you represent yourself an expert in the field, you can be treated as a merchant. Also, you're going to be a merchant if you employ a merchant, or you employ a broker or agent or intermediary to deal with the other party. As I said, leases are covered under a new section 2A. And of course, if we have that, we're going to have a definition of what a lease is. And a lease is a bargain whereby one party gets the right of use of another party's goods, but no title is passed. And the UCC 2A covers all leases. Now, there are some special cases. If you have a lessor who regularly writes off a lease, if you have a leasee who enters into it for the purposes of personal, family, or household purposes, if the total payments are under $25,000, then some parts of 2A will apply and some do not. So one of the questions about the UCC lease section is there are going to be some special rules, really, that the states have held back to themselves. So you have to, if you've got a lease involved, you're going to have to look a little bit closer at the law to understand what's going on. Also, one of the things that can be talked about, and this is going to be particularly important when we get to secure transactions, is the finance lease. Because what you have happening here is you have 3 parties: the person that's leasing, the lessor, and a supplier. So sometimes what you have is someone says, well, I'm going to finance this lease for you. I'm going to take title to it. I'm from the seller. I'm going to lease it to you. And you owe the money to me, not to them. So this happens pretty much all the time with cars. If you went into to buy a GM product and you bought a new pickup truck at a dealership, GM, General Motors Corporation, is not going to hold title to that car. what they're going to do is GMAC, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, okay, is going to buy that from GM, believe it or not. Then they're the ones that are going to lease it to you. Now that can be important because what they're saying is, we're leasing this, we're not selling it to you, okay? If you've got a problem, you can go talk to GM, but it's a different issue. And again, it's critical on establishing duties to perform because special duties and obligations can arise. Okay, the UCC modifies many of the common law terms and many of the common law practices that we just learned. But the nice thing about the UCC is it says, hey, if you don't like some specific section, and if everybody agrees to it and everybody understands, you can do what you want. You can change the rules. So if let's just suppose that the UCC has a firm offer rule, you don't like the firm offer rule, and you sign a contract that says the contract between us expressly waives and disregards the firm offer rule as found in North Carolina General Statute such and such and the UCC such and such section. You can do that under the UCC. Okay, a couple quick things then. Under classic, this should be classic, not class. Under classic contract law, you have to have a definite offer. You have to have unqualified acceptance, and then you create your binding contract. The UCC allows you a little bit more wiggle room. I'm going to fix this as we're talking right now. The UCC allows you, get a look behind the curtain here, because I'm going to change that. The UCC says, no, we're going to change some of the rule here. There we go. And second. We're going to allow open terms. So this is what you can have open under the UCC. You can leave this final price open, which is a real shock to people. And the UCC will say the price should be what's reasonable at time of delivery. You can leave open payment terms. The UCC lets you pay in any reasonable manner. Presumptively, payment is due at the time and place when goods are delivered. It even lets you have open delivery terms. Normally, seller places a business. If not, it's a residence. And the time of this is whatever is reasonable. So you can see the UCC gives you lots of ways that an otherwise fairly vague offer, which might fail under classic contract law, can be interpreted as, yeah, that's fine. Generally, you can terminate any contract with reasonable notification under the UCC. Again, this can be modified. I told you, if you don't like that term, change it. The seller has the option, if the contract is silent, to make reasonable conditions for performance. So if the contract says, send me 1,000 balloons, and there's no color mentioned, pink balloons, red balloons, they can mix in whatever commercially reasonable. Open quantity terms. Now this is something that the UCC doesn't like. If you don't tell me how many of something you're selling, so if you say I'm selling you balloons at 3 cents each, but you don't tell me how many you're selling, that's not a contract yet under the UCC, with 2 exceptions. Requirement contracts, where I say, I don't know how many I'm going to need, but however many I need, I'm going to buy it from you. It's a valid contract. Or an output contract, that's UCC 2-306. I don't know how much you're going to produce, but whatever you produce, I'll buy. Both of those types of contracts are valid. We also have the merchant's firm offer rule under the UCC. Under classic contract, if you recall, unless there was some difference where you paid for it, it was a paid optional contract, a contract offer can be revoked at any time. The UCC says, not so fast. It modifies it. It creates what's called the firm offer. If you have a signed writing, and the writing says, we are offering to keep this open, then they can't revoke it without consideration for some stated period. And if the offer is silent, it's a reasonable time. So merchants have to be careful there. And again, you might want to alter that. You might want to say this offer is made exclusive of the merchant's firm offer rule. Okay, so we had offer. Let's look at acceptance. Common law shows a preference for reasonable acceptance. Now, the next section I put in there so that you can see how the regular contract, sale of goods, and the lease contract, leasing of goods, kind of mirror each other. The UCC says any reasonable means of acceptance, given whatever circumstances. For both the sale of goods, UCC 2-206, once you're in the 200, it's usually talking about how things work, or 2A, which means it's going to be a lease, 206 subsection 1. Under the UCC, a promise to ship or actual shipment is deemed acceptance. Communication. Now here, the UCC is a little stronger than the common law. There's a strong preference for notification of acceptance and not mere performance. The UCC is not wild about unilateral contracts. Additional terms. Remember, under the classic rule, if you add additional terms, that's deemed a counteroffer. Counteroffers kill regular offers. So typically under common law, an acceptance with additional terms is a counteroffer. That has struck down the original offer. The UCC has two standards. Remember, I said it's different if you're a merchant. If you're both non-merchants, then these additional terms do not become part of the contract unless they say the offer is contingent upon these terms. If both parties are merchants, then the additional terms in the acceptance do become part of the contract, unless the original offer says no additional terms, or they materially, substantially alter the contract, or the offeror, the person who made the offer, objects to the new terms within a reasonable time. Offers that contain conditions that are that only accept if they become part of the contract are, however, counteroffers. The UCC will allow terms that are conflicting to just be stricken and the contract to be enforced. Okay, well, what about consideration? Because we talked quite a bit about the quid pro quo. Well, here again, the UCC makes it easier. Under the common law, if there was no new consideration, you couldn't have a new contract. But unlike the common law, the UCC says, nope. If you make your modifications in good faith, which is definitely part of the UCC and definitely part of both 2 and 2A, there's no duress, there's good reason for the modification, it doesn't matter. You can modify contracts without new consideration. Statute of Frauds. Again, the UCC here is laxer than the common law. You need only imply that you wanted to form a contract and to have something that is signed. In other words, you don't have to have a single piece of paper. You can agree to a contract orally and then send a written confirmation, and that's good enough. Also, the UCC recognizes partial performance, admission in courts, and specially manufactured goods. The amount that have to be written remains, and we'll just keep this number even though don't worry about it, are 500 for sales and 1,000 for leases. Okay, what about the parole evidence rule? Because we just learned that. Well, typically the contract was the final written reflection of the parties. But the UCC says, nah, go ahead. If you need to introduce something to clear up a term, we're fine with that. The UCC lets in more evidence. The parole evidence rule becomes weaker under the UCC. And here's where I said we were going to start talking about this a few chapters back. Course of dealing, usage of trade, course of performance. What do these terms mean? Course of dealings. How the parties behaved under previous contracts. Usage of trade. How people in that business behave. Now, basically, we will allow that stuff to be used to interpret contracts. We'll also look at the current way both parties are behaving or have behaved under the contract, and they become admissible to explain how the contract should be executed or enforced. Rules of construction, express terms first. Then we can look at course of performance second. Going back here, remember course of performance is the current way you've been behaving. Then course of dealings. Course of dealings is how you behaved under previous contracts. Usage of trade, going back one more time, usage of trade is how people in this business behave. So if we have an issue interpreting a contract, we go express conditions, then we go course of performance, course of dealings, usage of trade. Unconscionability. The UCC allows contracts to be struck down for unconscionability, but it looks at the contracts at the time they're made. And the UCC gives you three options. Don't enforce the contract, strike out that clause which is unconscionable, or limit its application. So again, the UCC really wants contract. I can't emphasize that the UCC likes contracts. Okay, the Convention on the Contracts for Intersale of Goods has been adopted by 70 countries, including the US. It's essentially an international Article 2, and it fills in some of the blanks for us. I'm not going to talk much about it, I'm afraid. It's similar, but there are some differences in the mirror image rule, the irrevocable offers, the statute of frauds, the time of contract formation. Traditionally, if we look at the UCC and the CISG here, traditional approach, the offer should be the mirror image of the acceptance, and vice versa. Will you buy 500 tons of coal on December 1st? That's your offer. The acceptance, I will buy 500 tons of coal on December 1st. The UCC abolishes the mirror image rule. It doesn't have to be identical. You can still accept even with different terms. The CISG allows different terms unless they're materially different. But virtually any terms under the CISG are determined to be materially different. UCC 2-204 says merchants can create irrevocable offers under the firm offer rule. The CISG says you don't even have to sign them. The UCC sets a $500 limit to trigger the writing requirement. The CISG has no writing requirements. No statute of frauds for the CISG. The old mailbox rule under the UCC, we don't worry about the mailbox rule. UCC says acceptance is effective upon dispatch. The CISG says nope, effective on receipt. So if you're dealing internationally, there can be different rules here. Some special provisions you should be aware of, what language you interpret. That's very, very important. What choice of forum, where are you going to hear your case if there's a dispute? What choice of law, and how are you going to enforce it? That's the force majeure clause. Okay, that keeps us right at half an hour. We'll pick up with the next chapter whenever you're ready.